People always ask me the same thing. They ask if I was scared, and I tell them the truth, which is that fear came later. On the morning itself, there wasn't room for it. There was only the line we'd been drilled into for half a year, and the sound, and a young man in a red tunic who did not move when every instinct in the world told him he should. His name was Daniel Croft. I served beside him, and I want to tell you about him properly from the start, because if I only give you the loud part, you'll get the wrong idea about what it actually means to stand a post. So let me take you back to the winter before the coronation, when none of us knew what was coming, and the worst thing we worried about was a sergeant called Mallory, and the way he could find a crooked chin strap from 40 feet away. I'm not going to pretend I remember every day of that training. Soldiers don't. The days blur into one long gray ache of boots and brass and cold parade squares, but I remember the shape of it. I remember the smell of the rifle oil and the way your breath hung in the air at 6 in the morning when we marched out before the city had even woken up. I remember Daniel, 18 months younger than me, looking like he'd been carved out of nerves and good intentions, turning up on the first day with his kit too clean and his face too hopeful. We thought he wouldn't last. I'll be honest about that. There's a thing that happens with the keen ones, the ones who arrive wanting it too much. They burn bright and then they crack. The lads who survive the long winters are usually the quiet ones, the ones who don't say much and just keep showing up. Daniel was loud in a soft way, if that makes sense. He'd talk to anybody. He'd ask the cooks how their weekend was. He'd remember that you'd mentioned your mum was unwell and he'd ask after her 3 days later. Most of us couldn't be bothered with that. He couldn't help it. The first time I really noticed him was on the square in late January. It had been raining for 9 days. Not heavy, just that thin, mean London rain that gets into everything and never seems to fall hard enough to feel like proper weather. We were doing arms drill, the same movements over and over, the rifle coming up and across and down, the slap of palms on wood, the stamp of boots. Mallory was walking the line like a wolf, and one of the lads, a big fellow named Os, locked his knees the way you're told never to do and went down. Just folded, out cold before he hit the ground. Now there's a rule about that. You don't break ranks. You don't move. The man next to the one who's fainted does not bend down, does not reach out, does not do a single thing, because the line is the line, and the moment you start making exceptions, you don't have a line anymore, you have a crowd. Mallory had said it 100 times. We'd all nodded. We all understood it in our heads. Daniel was next to Osai, and I watched him fight it. I was 3 men down and I could see the whole thing. I saw his jaw tighten. I saw his eyes flick down to where his mate was lying in the wet with his cheek against the concrete. Every cell in that boy wanted to crouch and check he was breathing. You could see it costing him. His hand actually trembled on the rifle. But he didn't move. The medics came, the way they always do, fast and quiet from the edge of the square, and they had Osai sitting up in under a minute, and Daniel stood there the whole time staring straight ahead at nothing with his chin up, and there was a tear coming down his face. Just one. He didn't wipe it. He couldn't, of course. You don't move. Mallory walked over to him afterwards. We all braced for the roar. Mallory could take the skin off you with his voice alone. He didn't roar. He stood very close to Daniel, the way he did when he was about to say something he meant, and he said, quiet enough that I only half caught it, "That's the hardest thing you'll ever do, son. Standing still when your heart's screaming at you to move. You did it. Remember that you can." And then he walked off and bollocked someone else for a loose button, because he was still Mallory. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought it was just discipline, just the machine working the way it's meant to. It took me a long while and one specific morning in May to understand what Mallory had actually been teaching us. He wasn't teaching us to stand still. Any statue can stand still. He was teaching us to stand still while everything in us wanted to run, and to know the difference between the two. Daniel got it before the rest of us did. I think he got it that day on the square. The months ground on. February, March. The training got heavier, longer. Word started coming down that there was a big event in the spring, that the eyes of the whole world were going to be on us, and that nothing was going to go wrong. They didn't say the word coronation for a while, like saying it would jinx it, but we all knew. You'd have to have been living under a rock not to know. The whole country knew. The flags were already going up in shop windows by March. The bunting. The mugs with the wrong face on them in the cheap shops on Oxford Street. For us it meant rehearsal on top of rehearsal. We did the route in pieces. We did timings down to the second. We learned exactly where we'd be standing, how long we'd be there, what the relief pattern was. We practiced in the dark and we practiced in the rain, and once, gloriously, we practiced in a freak hailstorm that had grown men laughing through gritted teeth because there was nothing else to do but laugh. I want you to understand what standing a post actually is, because people see the photos and they think it's easy. They think you just stand there. They see the bearskin and the red and the still face and they think, well, anyone could do that. Try it. Try standing genuinely still for 2 hours, not shifting your weight, not scratching the itch on your nose that arrives, I promise you, within 90 seconds of you deciding you can't move, not looking at the pretty girl who's waving at you, not flinching when a child screams or a bus backfires or a pigeon, and this happened to me, lands directly on the top of your head and sits there. Your feet swell, your lower back sets like concrete. Your mind does strange things in the silence, starts playing you songs you hate, starts running arguments you had years ago. And through all of it, you have to look like the whole thing is effortless, because the moment you look like you're suffering, you've broken the spell. The whole point of us is that we look unbreakable. We look like Britain looks when Britain wants to look its best. Steady, calm, not going anywhere. Daniel was the best of us at it by April. I'll give him that without any envy, because it's just true. He found a stillness the rest of us had to fake. I asked him once how he did it, on a smoke break, both of us leaning against a wall trying to get the feeling back in our feet. He thought about it for a long time. He was like that. He didn't give you the quick answer. I just decide I'm not the most important thing happening, he said eventually. There's the post and there's me, and the post matters more. So I sort of stepped back from myself. Let the post do the standing. I laughed at him. I called him a philosopher. I told him to stop reading those books. But it stuck with me. Let the post do the standing. I've thought about that line more times than I can count. There was a girl, by the way. There's always a girl. Hers was called Priya, and she worked in a coffee place near the barracks. And Daniel was so obviously, hopelessly soft on her that the whole section took to ordering our coffees through him just to watch him go red. He'd asked her out twice. She'd said no twice, but the kind of no that was clearly turning into a maybe, and he was playing the long game with a patience that frankly the rest of us didn't have the character for. He carried a photo of his mum and his little sister in his breast pocket, against the rules, and we all knew and nobody said anything because some rules are stupid, and that one is stupid. I'm telling you these small things on purpose. I'm telling you he liked his eggs scrambled and he was rubbish at cards and he sang badly and constantly and got every lyric wrong. Because when this story gets to where it's going, I don't want him to be a symbol to you. I don't want him to be a brave statue in a red coat. I want you to know there was a whole entire person inside that uniform. A person with a crush and a sister and a terrible singing voice, and that person made a choice. That's the only reason a choice means anything. A statue can't be brave. Only a frightened man can be brave. April turned into May. The week before the coronation was unlike anything I've experienced before or since. The city changed. You could feel it tightening. Filling up, getting ready. The barricades went out along the route. The world's press arrived in their hundreds. There were faces on the news talking about the security operation, the biggest in a generation, they kept saying, thousands of officers, the whole apparatus of a nation deciding that nothing on this day of all days would be allowed to go wrong. And underneath all the pomp and the bunting, if you knew where to look, there was an edge. The senior men had it. The briefings got more serious. There were conversations happening above our heads that we caught only the edges of. Threat picture, posture, contingency. Words like that said in flat voices by men who weren't smiling. The night before, none of us really slept. I lay in my bunk and listened to the others not sleeping. Somebody's watch ticked. Somebody turned over for the 100th time. Across the room, I could hear Daniel breathing, slow and deliberate, and I knew he was doing the thing, the stepping back thing, getting himself ready. Letting the post do the standing, even now, even lying down in the dark. At some point I whispered, "You all right, Dan?" And he whispered back, "Best day of my life tomorrow. Why wouldn't I be?" He meant it. That's the thing that still gets me. He meant it completely. The coronation. The world watching. His mum and his sister coming down on the train to stand in the crowd and see him on his post. To Daniel, that wasn't a job. It was the whole reason he joined. He told me once early on that his granddad had stood a post for the late Queen's coronation, decades before either of us were born, and that there was a photo of it on the wall at home, black and white, his granddad young and proud in the exact same red. Daniel grew up under that photo. He wanted his own. He wanted his mum to see her boy where her dad had stood. Best day of my life tomorrow. I think about that whisper a lot. We were up at 4. The morning was cool and gray, but the cloud was thin, and you could tell it was going to burn off into something fine. There was a strange quiet over the barracks, the quiet of a lot of men all concentrating very hard on small tasks. Bearskins on, tunics checked and checked again, boots you could shave in. Somebody's hands were shaking doing up a strap, and Daniel reached over without a word and did it for him, and the lad nodded thanks, and that was that. Mallory walked the line one last time. He didn't shout. He looked at each of us, properly looked, and at the end he said something I'd never heard him say in all the months before. He said, "Whatever happens out there today, you hold your post. That's all. You don't have to be heroes, you don't have to be clever. You just have to be where you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to do. The post is the promise. Hold the post. The post is the promise." Then we marched out into the morning, into the noise of a city that had got up early to watch its own history, and we took up our positions, and the crowds were already deep, already singing, already waving their little flags, mums lifting children onto shoulders, the whole great cheerful river of it. Daniel was perhaps 30 feet from me, on a post near the edge of the park, where the route ran close to the trees. I could see the side of his face under the bearskin, calm as still water. The morning began the way every account of that day will tell you it began. Bright, joyful, enormous. The bells, the band somewhere off in the distance starting to tune. The smell of coffee and hot dogs already drifting from the vendors. A police horse clopping past, its rider nodding good morning to the front row. For about 40 minutes, it was the best day of all our lives. And then, at 23 minutes past 8, somewhere off behind the line of trees on the Hyde Park side, in a quiet service road that no member of the public should have been able to reach, the morning broke in half. I'll tell you about the sound in a moment. I'll tell you about what it did to the crowd and to the horses and to all our months of careful training in a single instant. I'll tell you what I saw when I turned my head, which I wasn't supposed to do, and what Daniel did, which was nothing, which was everything. But not yet. You've waited this long with me. Wait a little longer, because the thing I most need you to understand happened in the half second before the sound, and it was this. It was the last half second of the best day of his life. And he was smiling. The sound is the thing nobody who was there can describe properly, and I'm not going to pretend I can do better. But I'll try, because you deserve more than the word bomb. It wasn't a bang. A bang is a thing that starts and stops. This started and then it kept going, it rolled. It came up through the soles of my boots before it ever reached my ears, a low animal shove in the chest, and then the crack of it arrived a half beat later and took the morning with it. The bells stopped. The band stopped. 40,000 people stopped all at once in the same fraction of a second, and for one whole heartbeat London was completely silent. That silence is worse than the noise. I've talked to others who were there and they all mention it. The silence. Like the whole city had its breath knocked out at the same time. Then it came back, all of it at once. The screaming started somewhere near the trees and spread outward like fire over dry grass, and underneath the screaming was a deeper sound, the groan and crush of bodies moving. Thousands of people who a second ago had been waving flags now all deciding at the exact same moment that they had to be somewhere else, anywhere else, immediately. The barricades went over. I watched a steel barrier just fold under the weight of people and disappear under their feet. A pushchair went over, and a man I'll never know the name of threw himself down over it, and the crowd went round him like water round a rock. And the horses. I have to tell you about the horses because they're part of what makes that morning a kind of nightmare you can't quite wake from. There were mounted police along the route, and the blast went through them like a current. These are trained animals, calm in ways you wouldn't believe, but no training survives that. One of them reared and came down sideways and bolted straight into the crowd, and there was nothing the rider could do but hang on and shout, and people were going down in front of it. I'm telling you all this so you understand the conditions. I'm telling you so that later when I tell you what Daniel did, you don't picture him standing somewhere quiet and brave. I want you to picture the actual place. Smoke coming up black over the tree line, people trampling each other, a horse loose and terrified, screaming on every side. Somewhere a car alarm going off of all things, that detail I'll never forget, an ordinary car alarm whooping away in the middle of the end of the world. That's where his post was, right at the edge of it. I broke. I'll admit that first before I tell you about him because it matters. I'm the one who told you about months of training and the line and standing still. And in the first second after that sound, I turned my head. Full turn towards the trees, towards the smoke, every instinct in my body wrenching me round to look at the threat. Months of drill and it went in an instant. I'm not ashamed of it exactly. I'm just telling you the truth. The body does what the body does. And when I turned, I could see him. Daniel was facing the same way he'd been facing all morning, towards the crowd, towards his post's arc, the patch of the world he was responsible for. He had not turned to look at the smoke. He had not flinched towards the horse. He was exactly, precisely, impossibly where he was supposed to be, standing the way he'd stood for 2 hours, the way he'd been taught to stand on a wet square in January with a tear on his face. For a second I thought he simply hadn't understood what had happened. I actually thought that. I thought, he's in shock, he's frozen. I was wrong. He understood perfectly. I learned that in the next 30 seconds, and they're the 30 seconds I'm going to give you slowly, because they happened slowly, the way the worst moments always do. The crowd in front of Daniel's post was funneling. There's no other word for it. The barriers further down had gone and the people were being squeezed into the gap near the trees, and the gap was filling, and at the front of it, right where Daniel stood his post, there was a family. A woman, 2 children, small, one of them in her arms and one clinging to her leg. And she had gone down. She'd been knocked off her feet by the crush behind her, and she was on the ground at the front of a wave of 40,000 frightened people, and she could not get up, and the wave was coming. I have seen the footage since. We've all seen the footage. Someone filmed it on a phone from a balcony and it went round the world, and you've probably seen it too without knowing you were watching Daniel. But I saw it live 30 feet away with my own eyes, and the footage doesn't have what I had, which is that I knew him. He moved. Now here's the thing I need you to hold on to because it's the whole point. It's everything Mallory ever tried to teach us. Daniel had stood completely still through the blast, still through the horse, still through the screaming and the smoke. He had not moved 1 inch for the threat. He moved for the woman. There's a difference, Mallory's difference. You don't move because you're frightened. You move because someone needs you. The first kind of moving breaks the line. The second kind is what the line is for. He didn't run. That's the detail that undoes me. He didn't break into a panic and bolt like the rest of the world was doing. He stepped off his post in 3 controlled strides, the way you'd cross a parade square, and he reached down into that crush, and he got the woman by the arm and he hauled her up. And then he did the thing that I think about every single day of my life since. He turned his back to the crowd. He put himself between the wave and the family, and he planted his feet. A man on his own against 40,000. It's not even a contest, you'd think. One soldier can't hold back a crowd, and he couldn't, not really, not for long. But he didn't have to hold it back. He had to hold a space. A small space, a Daniel-shaped pocket of stillness, just big enough for a woman and 2 children to get their feet under them and get sideways out of the funnel towards the trees where it was opening up. And he held it. He took the crush against his back, the bearskin knocked clean off his head and gone under the feet of strangers, his tunic torn at the shoulder, and he braced like a man bracing against the sea. And he shouted at them, "Go, go, that way, G.O." And his arm was out pointing the way, and the woman understood and dragged her children sideways and out. I was moving by then. I'd like to tell you I was as good as him, but I wasn't. I got there a few seconds later, and another lad, Reese, got there too, and the 3 of us made a little wall, and it's easier with 3. It's so much easier with 3. And I understood standing there shoulder to shoulder with them why we drill the line, why we drill it until it's in our bones, because the line is just this. 3 frightened men deciding to be a wall so that the people behind them can live. We held that gap for what the reports later said was a little over 2 minutes. 2 minutes. It felt like an hour and it felt like a breath, both at once. People poured past us and through the gap we made, and most of them never knew we were there, never knew anything except that there was somewhere to go, and so they went. That's all right. That's the job. You don't do it to be seen. A police sergeant reached us, then more of them, then the whole machine of the response started to take hold, the way it does, the trained people arriving and turning chaos back into something with edges. The crowd thinned. The crush eased. The danger of that particular spot, the danger of people simply crushing other people to death in a funnel, passed. And when it passed, I turned to Daniel to say something. I don't even know what, something stupid probably, something like, "All right, mate," the way you do. He was very pale. I thought it was just the shock, the come down, the thing that hits all of us when the moment lets go. I put my hand on his shoulder and he looked at me and he smiled, that same soft, loud smile, and he said, "Did they get out? The little ones?" And I said, "Yes. Yes, Dan, they got out. You got them out, they're fine." And his smile got bigger and softer and he said, "Good, that's good." And then I felt it under my hand, on his shoulder where the tunic was torn, wet, dark. And it wasn't dirt and it wasn't sweat, and the color of his red tunic had hidden it from me, the way the red is meant to hide things, the way they say the color was chosen long ago so the blood wouldn't show. Something had come through the trees with the blast. A piece of something thrown far, the way things are in those events, finding him while he stood his post before he ever moved a muscle. He'd been hit before he picked the woman up. He'd held that gap, taken that crush against his back, shouted those people to safety, all of it already hurt, and he had not said one word. He had let the post do the standing. I want to stop here, right here, with my hand on his shoulder and the truth coming up through my fingers and his soft voice saying, "That's good, that's good." Because the next part is hard and you've earned a breath before it, and so have I. But I'll tell you this much, so you're not left in the worst of it. We got him down. We got the medics, the whole apparatus that had been built for that day, the biggest operation in a generation, the thousands of trained people, all of it turned, in the end, towards one young guardsman lying on the grass near the trees with his friends around him, and his bearskin lost somewhere in the crowd. And as they worked on him, and as the morning that was supposed to be the best day of his life came apart around all of us, Daniel Croft did one more thing. He asked through everything, in a voice getting smaller, whether his mum had seen. Whether his mum, somewhere out there in the crowd that had come to watch him stand where her father once stood, had seen her boy do his job. They didn't let me go in the ambulance. There were rules, and people more important than me to ride with him, And so the last I saw of Daniel that morning was the doors closing on him on the grass with a medic's hands pressing down on his shoulder and his lips still moving, asking the same question, getting smaller. Then they were gone, and I was standing on the churned-up grass near the trees in my torn tunic with no bearskin, in the middle of a day that had stopped being a day and become a thing that would have a name in the history books, and I had no idea whether my friend was going to live. I'm not going to walk you through the hours after. They were what hours like that always are. Long, useless, full of waiting and not knowing. We were stood down eventually, hosed off the line by the response, and somebody put a foil blanket round my shoulders that I didn't want, and somebody else asked me questions I couldn't answer. The coronation, for what it's worth, was secured, the route held, the wider danger contained. The thing that happened near the trees turned out to be the only one. One device in one quiet service road that should not have been reachable and was. They'll tell you in the inquiries exactly how and why. That's not my part of the story. My part is the grass and the waiting. I found his mum that evening. I'd never met her, but I knew her the second I saw her, because she had his face, the same soft, loud face, except the loud part had gone out of it. She was sitting in a corridor at the hospital with his little sister asleep against her, 15 years old and exhausted into sleep the way only the young can manage. And the mum was just sitting there bolt upright, staring at a door. I went over. I didn't know what to say. I said the only true thing I had. I said I served with Daniel. I was next to him this morning. I want you to know that he saved a family, a woman and 2 little ones. He got them out. He did it on purpose, and he did it well, and he didn't move until they were safe. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Did he look frightened?" And I thought about lying the kind way. And then I thought about Daniel, who never gave the quick answer, who always told you the true one even when it cost him, and I told her the truth. He looked calm, I said. He looked like he knew exactly what he was doing. She nodded. She put her hand over her mouth, and then she said the thing that broke me finally after a whole day of not breaking. She said, "I saw him in the crowd before. I saw my boy on his post, and I took a photo on my phone, and I was going to put it next to my dad's." And she started to cry, the quiet kind, and I sat down next to her because I didn't know what else to do. And the little sister woke up and looked at me, and the 3 of us sat there in that corridor staring at the door. I'll tell you now, because you've waited and you've been good, and I won't keep it from you any longer. He lived. He nearly didn't. There were 2 surgeries that first night and a third the next day, and a stretch of about 40 hours where nobody would tell us anything except critical and stable, which are words that mean nothing and everything. But Daniel Croft was, underneath the soft face and the bad singing, made of something stubborn. And he held on the way he held that gap, by deciding he wasn't the most important thing happening and getting on with it. I saw him about a week later when they finally let people in. He was gray and thin and full of tubes, and he could barely talk above a whisper. But he smiled when I came in, that same smile, and he lifted one hand a couple of inches off the blanket, which was about all the wave he could manage. "All right, mate," I said. "Lost my bearskin," he whispered. "First thing he said, Mallory's going to kill me." And I laughed, and it turned into the other thing halfway through, the way it does, and I had to look out the window for a minute. Mallory did come, by the way, stood at the end of the bed with his hat in his hands, this man who could take the skin off you at 40 feet, and he didn't say much because there wasn't much to say. He just looked at Daniel for a long while, and then he said, "You held your post." And Daniel said, "I moved off it, Sergeant." And Mallory said, "No, you held it. The post was never the patch of grass, son. The post was the promise. You kept the promise." And then he put his hat back on and left before anyone could see his face, because he was still Mallory. The family Daniel saved came to find him. Of course they did. The woman, her name was Sarah, brought the 2 children, and the little one, the one who'd been in her arms, didn't understand any of it and just wanted to play with the buttons on the bedside controls. And Daniel watched that child mess about with the bed controls. This child who would have been crushed in a funnel of 40,000 people if a frightened young man had decided his own safety was the most important thing happening that morning. And he had a look on his face that I don't have a word for. Peace, maybe. The look of a man who knows the maths of his own life came out right. Priya came too, the coffee girl, the maybe that was turning into a yes. She walked in on the second week and didn't say anything clever or romantic. She just sat down by the bed and held his hand and told him off for scaring her, and he went red even with all the tubes, and I knew the long game was won. They're married now. I was there. He still can't sing. He didn't go back to the guard. He wanted to. He fought for it for the better part of a year, all the rehab, the gym, the appeals. But the body that had held that gap had given something up doing it, and it wouldn't quite come back, and in the end there's a medical board and there's no arguing with it. He took it hard, harder than the wound. The standing was the thing he loved. But here's what I've come to understand, and it's the thing I most want to leave you with. I went round to his place not long ago. He and Priya have a little flat now, and on the wall by the door where you can't miss it on your way in or out, there are 2 photos in 2 frames, side by side. One is black and white. A young man in a red tunic, proud and still, decades ago, a man Daniel never got to meet but grew up beneath. His grandfather. The post for a queen's coronation, long before either of us was born. And next to it in color, a little blurry because it was taken on a phone from deep in a crowd by a mother who didn't know what was about to happen, there's Daniel. 18 months younger than me, carved out of nerves and good intentions, standing his post on the best morning of his life, in the last few minutes before everything changed. 2 men, same red, same stillness, the promise handed down and kept. People still ask me if I was scared that day, and I still tell them the truth, that fear came later, that on the morning there was only the line and the sound and a young man who would not move until someone needed him to. But there's a second question they never think to ask, and it's the better one. They ask, were you brave? And the answer is no, not really. We were just 3 frightened men who'd been taught over one long gray winter that the line isn't a thing you stand in. It's a thing you become, for the people standing behind you. That's what a post is. That's what Daniel knew before the rest of us did, on a wet square in January with a single tear on his face that he wasn't allowed to wipe away. You don't stand still because you're strong. You stand still so that somebody else can run to safety past your shoulder. And if you ever get the chance to be a wall for someone, even for 2 minutes, even when everything in you is screaming to be anywhere else, I hope you remember a young man in a torn red tunic who turned his back on the danger and his face towards the frightened. He held the gap. He kept the promise. And his mum got her photo after all. I went round to his place not long ago. He and Priya have a little flat now, and on the wall by the door where you can't miss it on your way in or out, there are 2 photos in 2 frames, side by side. One is black and white. A young man in a red tunic, proud and still, decades ago, a man Daniel never got to meet but grew up beneath. His grandfather. The post for a queen's coronation, long before either of us was born. And next to it in color, a little blurry because it was taken on a phone from deep in a crowd by a mother who didn't know what was about to happen, there's Daniel. 18 months younger than me, carved out of nerves and good intentions, standing his post on the best morning of his life, in the last few minutes before everything changed. 2 men, same red, same stillness, the promise handed down and kept. People still ask me if I was scared that day, and I still tell them the truth, that fear came later, that on the morning there was only the line and the sound and a young man who would not move until someone needed him to. But there's a second question they never think to ask, and it's the better one. They ask, were you brave? And the answer is no, not really. We were just 3 frightened men who'd been taught over one long gray winter that the line isn't a thing you stand in. It's a thing you become, for the people standing behind you. That's what a post is. That's what Daniel knew before the rest of us did, on a wet square in January with a single tear on his face that he wasn't allowed to wipe away. You don't stand still because you're strong. You stand still so that somebody else can run to safety past your shoulder. And if you ever get the chance to be a wall for someone, even for 2 minutes, even when everything in you is screaming to be anywhere else, I hope you remember a young man in a torn red tunic who turned his back on the danger and his face towards the frightened. He held the gap. He kept the promise. And his mum got her photo after all.